They thought Pine Ridge was just another quiet town along the I-40 corridor. The kind of place where the sheriff knew everyone by name, where summer men ice cream at Mason's Diner, where the biggest excitement was usually the annual fall festival. But on a sunny Thursday morning, as Emily Hayes worked on her youth outreach programs at the community center, everything was about to change. When the Cartel's black Escalades rolled into town, they saw Daniel Hayes as just another small-town sheriff, the kind, approachable man who helped old Mrs. Henderson with her groceries and coached Little League on weekends. They thought threatening his daughter would make him step aside. They thought fear could break a town's spirit. They were about to learn how terribly wrong they were. Because in the next 72 hours, Rafael's cartel would discover they hadn't just threatened any sheriff's daughter. They had targeted a legendary SWAT commander's only child. And Daniel Hayes was about to show them why he'd been the most feared tactical leader in 3 states. Some mistakes you only make once. Some battles change everything. This is a story about what happens when evil mistakes kindness for weakness, when the wrong small town becomes a battleground, and when a father's past comes roaring back to protect everything he loves. Welcome to Pine Ridge, where one cartel's biggest mistake became a small town's finest hour. Hey everyone, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from if you're enjoying these stories of small towns fighting back. Make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. The morning sun painted long shadows across Main Street as Sheriff Daniel Hayes guided his patrol car through the familiar streets of Pine Ridge. Population 2,847, though the sign at the town limits needed updating since the Wilson twins were born last month. He smiled, remembering how their proud father had burst into his office with cigars, as if Daniel hadn't already heard the news from 3 different people at Mason's Diner that morning. That was Pine Ridge for you. News traveled faster than any police radio ever could. Daniel spotted old Mrs. Henderson struggling with her grocery bags outside the market. He pulled over, killing the engine. Need a hand there, Martha? Oh, Daniel Hayes, you're a sight for sore eyes. She beamed at him, her weathered face crinkling with warmth. These arthritic hands aren't what they used to be. As he helped load the bags into her car, Mrs. Henderson updated him on her grandchildren's college adventures, her church group's latest charity drive, and how her cat Mr. Whiskers had finally caught that mouse in her basement. Daniel listened attentively, asking just the right questions at just the right moments. You're just like your father was, she said softly, patting his arm. He'd be proud to see you wearing that badge. Daniel's throat tightened slightly. Thanks, Martha. Tell Mr. Whiskers I said congratulations on the mouse. 3 more stops like this punctuated his morning patrol, helping Mr. Rodriguez jumpstart his ancient pickup truck, mediating a minor dispute between the Baker brothers over their shared driveway, and warning a group of teenagers about skating too close to the antique shop's windows. Around noon, he pulled into the community center's parking lot, spotting his daughter Emily's red Volkswagen Beetle. Inside, she was directing volunteers with the confidence of someone twice her 24 years. No, the banner needs to go higher on the left. Perfect, Emily called out, her honey blonde ponytail swinging as she checked items off her clipboard. Hey Dad, come to check on our progress. The community center's main hall had been transformed. Colorful posters advertised the upcoming fundraiser, Building Bridges, Not Walls, youth outreach program. Tables lined the walls, waiting to be filled with donated items for the silent auction. Looking good, sweetheart, Daniel said, surveying the room. How many volunteers did you manage to wrangle? 25. Emily's green eyes sparkled with pride. Even got the Peterson twins to help. And you know how they feel about anything that doesn't involve their phones. A young volunteer approached Emily with a question about the sound system, and Daniel watched as she handled the situation with natural ease. She'd inherited her mother's way with people, that gift for making everyone feel heard and valued. The thought brought a familiar ache. Sarah would have loved seeing their daughter like this. Sheriff Hayes? Claire Matthews, the local news anchor, appeared at his elbow. Got a minute? Daniel followed her to a quiet corner. Claire's usually cheerful face was creased with concern. Off the record? He nodded. We're working on a story about increased drug activity in Millbrook and Carson City. 3 overdoses in the past month, all from heroin cut with something nasty. My sources say it's cartel-related. Daniel frowned. Those towns were less than 50 miles away. Any concrete evidence? Nothing solid yet, but Claire glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. The pattern matches what happened in other small towns along the I-40 corridor. They start small, establish distribution networks through local businesses. Then, she trailed off meaningfully. I appreciate the heads up, Claire. I'll keep an eye out. Back at the station that afternoon, Deputy Sam Martinez knocked on his office door. Sam was relatively new to the force, only 2 years on the job, but he had good instincts. Chief, noticed something odd yesterday. Black Escalade, out-of-state plates, parked outside the warehouse district for hours. 2 men inside, just watching. Daniel looked up from his paperwork. Get the plates. Try to run them. Came back registered to a rental company in Arizona. Probably just businessmen looking at properties, Daniel said, though something nagged at the back of his mind. But good catch. Keep noting anything unusual. Sam hesitated in the doorway. There's been more of them lately. Out-of-towners. They don't act like tourists. Sam, this is Pine Ridge. Biggest crime last month was when someone stole the Johnsons' garden gnome, which turned out to be their own grandson playing a prank. Daniel smiled reassuringly. Let's not go looking for trouble where there isn't any. That evening, Daniel arrived home to find Emily in the kitchen, attempting what appeared to be her grandmother's lasagna recipe. Before you say anything, she warned, wielding a sauce-covered spoon, I followed the recipe exactly this time. Is that why there's smoke coming from the oven? What? No. Emily whirled around, then caught his grin. Dad? Not funny. He laughed, dodging the dish towel she threw at him. Your mother was the same way. Could organize an entire community event without breaking a sweat, but put her in front of a stove? Emily's expression softened. Tell me about when you met her again. You've heard this story 100 times, so make it 101. They settled into their familiar routine, Emily attempting to salvage the lasagna, while Daniel leaned against the counter, telling the well-worn tale of how he'd literally bumped into Sarah at the police academy library, sending her books flying everywhere. She looked up at me with those green eyes, just like yours, and said, if you're going to knock a girl off her feet, you could at least buy her coffee first. Emily finished with him, giggling. The moment was interrupted by a flash of headlights through the kitchen window. A black Escalade rolled past their house, moving slower than usual traffic would. Daniel's cop instinct stirred, but he pushed them aside. Pine Ridge was the kind of town where people noticed anything new or different. No need to let paranoia ruin a perfect evening with his daughter. Meanwhile, across town, that same Escalade pulled into the parking lot of the Pine Ridge Inn. Rafael Mendez adjusted his designer watch, studying the reflection of the modest motel in his tinted windows. Quaint little town, he remarked to his companion, Hector Vargas. Very. American dream. Hector grunted, his scarred hands resting on the steering wheel. Too small. Too many eyes. That's exactly why it's perfect. Rafael's smile didn't reach his eyes. Small towns have long memories, but short attention spans. They see what they want to see. By the time they notice anything's wrong, he made a casual gesture. We'll be too deeply rooted to remove. They'd spent the day mapping the town's layout, noting security camera locations, police patrol patterns, and potential weak points. But it was their lunch stop at Mason's Diner that had yielded the most interesting information. Rafael had sat quietly in their booth, appearing absorbed in his phone, while actually listening to the conversations around him. The waitress's chatter had been particularly enlightening. Emily's doing such amazing work at the community center. Sheriff Hayes must be so proud. Did you hear about the fundraiser she's organizing? The sheriff's daughter? Hector had asked later, as they drove past the community center. Dedicated to helping troubled youth stay off the streets. Rafael's laugh held no humor. Ironic, no? But useful. Very useful. Sunday morning found most of Pine Ridge's population at the First Baptist Church. Daniel sat in his usual pew, half listening to Pastor Mike's sermon about community and vigilance. Emily sat beside him, occasionally whispering comments about the new choir robes or Mrs. Peterson's outrageous hat. Movement near the back of the church caught Daniel's attention. A man he didn't recognize, not unusual, as they sometimes had visitors, was staring intently in their direction. Not at him, Daniel realized with a chill. At Emily. The man noticed Daniel's attention and quickly looked away, appearing to focus on the sermon. He was well-dressed, with an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. Something about him set off warning bells in Daniel's mind, echoes of instincts honed during his SWAT days. "Dad," Emily whispered. "You okay?" Daniel forced himself to relax. "Just thinking about that lasagna. Think we should give it another try tonight?" "Very funny. I'm ordering pizza." The stranger slipped out before the service ended. By the time Daniel made it to the parking lot, there was no sign of him or the black Escalade that pulled away from the curb. Just passing through, Daniel told himself. That's all it is. But as he watched Emily chatting with the church ladies, laughing and making plans for the fundraiser, a forgotten weight settled in his chest. The weight of responsibility, of knowledge, of dangers he'd thought he'd left behind in his SWAT days. He pushed the feeling aside. Pine Ridge was safe. His daughter was safe. And if anyone tried to change that, but he didn't let himself finish that thought. Not yet. For now, he was just a small-town sheriff, heading to Sunday lunch with his daughter, in a town where everyone knew everyone else, and the biggest excitement was usually a fundraiser at the community center. The black Escalade watched them leave from 2 blocks away, its occupants making notes about patterns and routines, weaknesses and pressure points. The calm wouldn't last forever. The storm was already gathering on the horizon, invisible but inevitable, while Pine Ridge went about its Sunday business, blissfully unaware of the darkness heading its way. In the diner's parking lot, Rafael watched the sheriff's patrol car pass by, Emily's red Beetle following close behind. He pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think we found our way in." The sheriff's daughter. She's perfect. Sometimes the best way to control a town isn't through fear alone. Sometimes you need to break their heart first. The storm was coming. But for now, the sun still shone on Pine Ridge, and Sheriff Daniel Hayes was still just a father having lunch with his daughter, holding on to the peace while it lasted. Pine Ridge Trucking had been in the Anderson family for 3 generations. Bill Anderson took pride in running an honest business, just like his father and grandfather before him. But as he sat across from Rafael Mendez in his cluttered office, that legacy felt like a crushing weight on his shoulders. "Your company has an impressive safety record," Rafael said, examining a framed certificate on the wall. His tone was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "No accidents, no lost shipments. Very reliable." Bill shifted in his creaking chair. "We work hard to maintain our reputation. Exactly why we chose you." Rafael's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Our organization values reliability. We're prepared to pay generously for it." "Mr. Mendez, I appreciate the offer, but let me tell you about your daughter Jennifer," Rafael interrupted smoothly. "Sophomore at State College, studying veterinary medicine. Such a demanding program. She often studies late at the library, walks back to her dorm alone. Campus security can't be everywhere, unfortunately." The blood drained from Bill's face. "And your son Tommy, the high school quarterback. Beautiful house you bought your ex-wife in Carson City. By the way, Tommy stays with her every other weekend, doesn't he? Are you threatening my family?" Bill's voice shook with anger and fear. Rafael looked genuinely offended. "Threatening? No. I'm simply expressing interest in your lovely family. Just as my organization is expressing interest in your business." He pulled out a phone, showing Bill a photo of Jennifer leaving her dorm. It had been taken that morning. "We protect what interests us, Mr. Anderson. All of it." 20 minutes later, Rafael walked out with signed paperwork giving his import company exclusive use of 3 regular routes. In his wake, Bill Anderson stared at his trembling hands, knowing he'd just sold his soul, but seeing no other choice. At the community center, Emily was locking up her office when she heard raised voices from the basketball court. The afternoon youth program had ended an hour ago. No one should still be there. She found Hector looming over Marcus Thompson, a 17-year-old regular at the center. Marcus was backed against the wall, trying to look tough despite his obvious fear. "I don't know nothing about no package," Marcus was saying, his voice cracking. "Wrong answer, kid." Hector took a step closer. "My friend saw you. Is there a problem here?" Emily's voice rang out across the court. Both males turned. Marcus's relief was visible, but Hector's expression darkened dangerously. "This is a private conversation," Hector growled. Emily walked forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "The center's closed. Any conversations need to happen elsewhere." She positioned herself between Hector and Marcus. Marcus, your mom called earlier. She needs you home. Miss Hayes. Marcus started, worried. Now, Marcus. The teenager hesitated, then slipped past them. Hector watched him go, his scarred hands flexing. You should mind your own business, he said softly. Emily met his gaze. These kids are my business, and if I see you near any of them again, you'll be dealing with more than just me. The sheriff's daughter. Hector sneered. Daddy won't always be around to protect you. I don't need protection to recognize a bully. Emily's voice was ice. Now get out before I call the police. I mean the real police, not my daddy. Something dangerous flashed in Hector's eyes, but he backed away. Have a nice evening, Miss Hayes. Later that night, Hector sat in Rafael's motel room, relating the encounter. She's got spirit, Rafael mused, mixing a drink at the minibar. Most people, they see you coming, they look away. But she, he smiled that cold smile again. She'll make an excellent example. The kids trust her, Hector added. The whole town does. Through her, we could control the youth programs, yes. But more importantly, Rafael swirled his drink thoughtfully. Breaking her will break both the sheriff and the town's spirit. Two birds, one stone. At the sheriff's station, Daniel was creating a spreadsheet on his ancient computer. Deputy Sam watched from the doorway. Documenting out-of-state vehicles? Sam asked. Just keeping track of patterns. Daniel entered another plate number. 3 black Escalades in the past week. Different plates, same make and model. Thought you said we shouldn't go looking for trouble? Daniel's fingers paused over the keyboard. Sometimes trouble comes looking for you. Better to see it coming. He'd noticed other changes too. Bill Anderson avoiding eye contact at the diner. Marcus Thompson jumping at shadows. Small things, but they added up to a pattern he recognized from his SWAT days. A community under pressure. The community center lights were mostly off when Emily finished reviewing grant proposals. She gathered her things, yawning. Movement in the parking lot caught her eye. A man sitting in a dark sedan, watching the building. Her hand hovered over her phone, tempted to call her father. But what would she say? That someone was legally parked in a public lot? That she had a bad feeling? She could already imagine his concerned expression, the increased patrols, the hovering. You're being paranoid, she muttered, gathering her courage. She walked to her car quickly but calmly, not looking at the sedan. By the time she'd driven away, she'd almost convinced herself it was nothing. The next evening, Rafael gathered his men in an abandoned warehouse just outside town. Maps and photographs covered a makeshift table, surveillance photos of the town, its businesses, and its people. Emily's picture held the center position. Pine Ridge is perfect for our needs, Rafael explained to the dozen men assembled. Small, isolated, strategically located. But its people still believe in law and order. They trust their sheriff. He tapped Emily's photo. So we teach them that trust is dangerous. That defiance has consequences. The girl talks tough, one man commented. Maybe she needs to learn. No. Rafael's voice cracked like a whip. Nothing direct. Not yet. First, we make her feel helpless. Watched. Alone. His finger traced the route from Emily's house to the community center. We take away her sense of safety, piece by piece. Then, when she's properly frightened, we show her what real fear means. And the sheriff? Rafael smiled. A father watching his child suffer while knowing he's powerless to stop it. That's a special kind of pain. The kind that makes a man willing to look the other way, just to make it stop. The men nodded, understanding the cruel logic. They'd seen it work before. Late that night, Hector approached Emily's parked Beetle, his movements silent and practiced. The lock was child's play for someone with his skills. Inside, he placed a single envelope on the driver's seat. The message inside was simple. A photo of Emily leaving work, taken that evening, with a black rose drawn across it. Below the photo, a stylized scorpion, the Cartel's calling card. The next morning, Daniel was helping Emily scrape ice off her windshield when he spotted the envelope through the window. Something about it raised the hair on his neck. Emily, wait. But she'd already opened the car door and picked up the envelope. He watched the color drain from her face as she looked inside. Dad? Daniel took the envelope, his cop instincts warring with parental panic. The scorpion symbol hit him like a physical blow. He'd seen it before, years ago, in a very different life. A life he'd thought he'd left behind. "Get in my car," he said quietly. "Now." "Dad, what?" "Now, Emily." His voice held no room for argument. As she moved to obey, he pulled out his phone, staring at the symbol that had haunted so many of his nightmares. "Sam, I need you to put out an APB on any black Escalades in the area. And call Bill Anderson. Tell him I need to talk to him. Now." Emily watched from the patrol car as her father photographed the envelope and its contents, his movements precise and professional. But she knew him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his expression. She'd only seen him like this once before, at her mother's funeral. "Dad," she called through the open window. "What's going on?" Daniel carefully sealed the envelope in an evidence bag before turning to her. For a moment, she saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not just concern or anger, but a cold, focused rage she'd never witnessed before. "I promise you," he said softly, "they will never touch you. Never." As he spoke, Rafael watched through binoculars from a distant rooftop, noting the sheriff's reaction with satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. The threat had been delivered, the warning received. Now it was time to show Pine Ridge's protector just how powerless he really was. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had arrived, and its first shadows were already falling across the town's peaceful facade. In his patrol car, Daniel Hayes gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing through possibilities and preparations. He tried to leave his past behind, to be just another small-town sheriff. But as he glanced at his daughter's worried face in the passenger seat, he knew that time was over. The protector of Pine Ridge was about to become its defender, and God help anyone who threatened what he loved. The cartel thought they'd chosen an easy target. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. But first, he had to get Emily somewhere safe. Because the envelope wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. And Daniel Hayes knew better than anyone that in war, the enemy always struck at your heart first. "Where are we going?" Emily asked as they pulled onto the highway. "To see an old friend," Daniel replied, his voice grim. "Someone who can help us understand what we're dealing with." In the rearview mirror, a black Escalade pulled out to follow them, keeping its distance. The game had begun, and there would be no going back to the peaceful days of small-town life. Not until this was finished, one way or another. Rafael's phone buzzed with a text from one of his surveillance teams. "Sheriff moving the girl." "Orders." Rafael smiled, typing his response. "Let them run. Fear works better when they think they have somewhere to hide." In Pine Ridge, the morning sun shone on streets that looked the same as always. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. The threat had emerged, the battle lines were drawn, and caught between a former SWAT commander and a ruthless cartel enforcer was a small town about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones you don't see coming until they're right on top of you. The peaceful facade of Pine Ridge was about to be shattered, and in its place would rise either a testament to courage and defiance, or a warning to other small towns about the price of resistance. Only time would tell which it would be, but one thing was certain. Nothing in Pine Ridge would ever be the same again. Emily noticed them 3 stores into her errands, 2 men who seemed to appear wherever she went. At first, she tried to convince herself it was coincidence. Pine Ridge wasn't that big. You often ran into the same people while running errands. But these men weren't locals. They moved differently, watched differently. One was tall and lean, with a scar along his jaw. The other was shorter, muscular, with a silver watch that caught the sunlight. When she left the pharmacy, they left too. When she stopped at the bank, they lingered by the ATM. Her hands trembled slightly as she loaded groceries into her trunk. In the reflection of her car window, she saw them watching from across the street, not even trying to be subtle anymore. They wanted her to know she was being followed. Her finger hovered over her father's number on her phone. But what would calling him accomplish? He was already worried enough after the envelope incident. Besides, she wasn't some helpless damsel who needed Daddy to chase away the bad guys. Still, she drove home via the longest route possible, making sure they weren't still following. Only when she was safely inside did she let herself shake. Meanwhile, at the station, Daniel sat surrounded by dusty cardboard boxes pulled from storage. Inside were files from his SWAT days, operations reports, surveillance photos, intelligence briefings. He spread them across his desk, searching for something specific. There, a photo from 8 years ago. The same scorpion symbol that had been on the threat to Emily, marking the wall of a warehouse his team had raided. The operation had dealt a serious blow to the cartel's operations in 3 states, but their leader had escaped. Daniel had always suspected they'd rebuild eventually. Just never thought it'd be here, he muttered, studying the old case notes. A knock interrupted his concentration. Deputy Sam entered, carrying coffee. "Thought you might need this," Sam said, taking in the scattered files. "Looks like a trip down memory lane." Daniel accepted the coffee gratefully. "More like a ghost story coming back to haunt me. Found anything useful?" "Maybe. The cartel we dealt with back then, they had a pattern. They'd move into small towns, establish distribution networks through local businesses. Anyone who resisted." He trailed off, remembering scenes he'd rather forget. "Like Bill Anderson? He's been acting strange lately." Daniel nodded grimly. "They always start with transport, then storage. Then they own the whole town." The next morning, Emily's scream brought Daniel running outside. Someone had carved words into her car door during the night. "Stay out or pay." Inside, Daniel ordered, already pulling out his phone. "Sam, get forensics out here, and put a patrol car on my house." But Emily wasn't listening. She was staring at her vandalized car, anger replacing fear. This was her town too, her community. How dare they try to intimidate her? Across town, Rafael sat in his temporary office, a back room at the Pine Ridge Inn, listening to Hector's report. "The girl's scared," Hector said, "but she's also angry. Might be dangerous." Rafael laughed softly. "Perfect. Angry people make mistakes. Tell Miguel and Jose to keep following her. Make it obvious. Let's see how she handles the pressure. In the community center, start with subtle warnings. Let them know there's a price for supporting her programs." Rafael's smile was cold. "Fear spreads like a virus. Soon they'll be too scared to even talk to her." Over the next few days, small changes rippled through Pine Ridge. Parents stopped bringing their kids to Emily's youth programs. Local businesses suddenly couldn't donate to her fundraisers. People crossed the street to avoid talking to her. The isolation hurt worse than the threats. Deputy Sam caught up with Daniel in the station parking lot. "Chief, that Escalade? I've spotted it at the truck stop, the warehouse district, and outside the community center. Same 2 guys inside. Taking notes?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "They're mapping patrol routes, camera locations, security weaknesses. Want me to bring them in?" "Not yet. If we move too soon, we'll never connect them to the bigger operation." Daniel checked his weapon out of habit. "But I'm going to do some recon of my own." That evening, Daniel parked his unmarked car near the truck stop, watching through binoculars. A cartel scout was easy to spot once you knew what to look for. The 2 casual lounging, the carefully positioned sight lines, the subtle hand signals to unseen partners. He photographed everything, building his case piece by piece. One wrong move could send the cartel deeper underground, making them harder to root out. But every minute he waited was another minute Emily was in danger. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Dad, we need to talk. I'm organizing something." Daniel found her at the community center, surrounded by protest signs and determined volunteers. His heart sank. "We can't let them win through fear," Emily declared, showing him the plans for a community march against crime. "The whole town's talking about these mysterious threats, these strange men watching everyone. We need to stand together. Emily, this isn't safe. Neither is letting them take over our town. You taught me that, Dad. Stand up to bullies." He wanted to tell her everything about his SWAT days, about what the cartel was really capable of. But looking at her passionate determination, he couldn't bring himself to extinguish that fire. "At least let me handle security," he said instead. The protest was larger than anyone expected. Hundreds of Pine Ridge residents marched down Main Street, carrying signs and chanting. Emily led them, her voice strong and clear. "Our town, our future." Daniel watched from his position near the front, noting the black Escalades circling the crowd. His hand never left his weapon. Rafael watched too, from his hotel window. "Brave girl," he mused to Hector. "Stupid, but brave. Time to show her the cost of courage." That evening, Claire Matthews was walking home from the news station, talking to Emily on her phone. "The protest was amazing," she said. "I'm editing the footage now. This story could expose everything there." Headlights blinded her. A van screeched to a stop. Rough hands grabbed her. "Claire." Emily's voice came from the dropped phone. "Claire, what's happening?" The phone went dark. 20 minutes later, Emily's phone chimed with a video message. Her hands shook as she pressed play. Claire sat bound to a chair, her face tear-streaked, but defiant. A masked man held today's newspaper next to her face, proving the video's authenticity. Another masked figure spoke in a digitally distorted voice. "You wanted attention, Emily Hayes? Now you have it. The question is, how many more friends are you willing to sacrifice for your principles?" The video ended with a close-up of Claire's terrified eyes. Emily sat frozen, her phone slipping from numb fingers. All her confidence, all her righteous anger drained away, replaced by cold, crushing guilt. This was her fault. Her protest, her defiance had put Claire in danger. Her phone chimed again. A text this time. "Tick-tock, Miss Hayes. Claire is counting on you to make the right choice." She was still staring at the message when her father burst in, alerted by the station about Claire's disappearance. "Emily? What's wrong? Talk to me." She turned her phone so he could see the video. Watched his expression shift from concern to cold fury. "They took her because of me," Emily whispered. "Because I wouldn't stay quiet." Daniel pulled her close, his voice fierce. "No. They took her because they're monsters who think fear gives them power. This is not your fault." But Emily barely heard him. All she could see was Claire's terrified face. All she could hear was that distorted voice promising more victims. She wanted to make a difference, to show the town they didn't have to be afraid. Instead, she'd painted a target on everyone she cared about. Rafael watched the police response unfold through his network of observers. Search parties being organized, roadblocks being set up, all useless. Claire was already miles away in a secure location. "The town's scared now," Hector reported, already hearing whispers blaming the girls' protest for bringing trouble. "Fear is like acid," Rafael said softly. "It eats through everything: courage, loyalty, community. By the time we're done, this town will give us anything we want, just to make the fear stop." He picked up his phone, composing another message to Emily. "Every hour you wait, every move you make that isn't surrendering, will cost Claire dearly. Her suffering is your choice now." In her room, Emily stared at her protest signs, her fundraiser plans, all her naive attempts to fight back. Outside, she could hear her father coordinating search efforts, his voice tight with controlled rage. She picked up her phone, hand steady now. Typed, "What do you want?" The response came instantly. "Smart girl. Let's talk about the future of your youth programs." Daniel, watching the door to Emily's room, felt a familiar cold certainty settle over him. He'd seen this pattern before in his SWAT days. First they attacked your confidence, then your support system. Then they offered you a devil's bargain. Compromise just a little, look the other way just once, and the pain would stop. But it never stopped. Each compromise led to another, until you were so entangled in their web that escape seemed impossible. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Jack, it's Daniel Hayes. Remember that favor you owe me? I'm calling it in. Bring everything." Because this wasn't just about finding Claire anymore. This was war. And Daniel Hayes had been fighting cartels long before he became a small-town sheriff. The cartel thought they'd found an easy target in Pine Ridge. They were about to learn why you don't threaten a former SWAT commander's daughter. But first, he had to keep Emily from making a deal with the devil. Because he knew better than anyone, once you started dancing with demons, the music never really stopped. Through his surveillance network, Rafael watched Pine Ridge descend into fear and suspicion. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Every small town had its breaking point. He'd found Pine Ridges in the sheriff's brave, foolish daughter. Now it was just a matter of turning the screws until something, or someone snapped. The storm had arrived in Pine Ridge, and its first casualty was hope. But as Daniel Hayes knew all too well, sometimes hope had to die before determination could be born. And determination, cold, implacable, ruthless determination, was something he had in abundance. The war for Pine Ridge's soul had begun, and there would be no going back to the way things were. Not until the last shot was fired. Emily's hands shook as she played the video again, tears streaming down her face. Daniel watched Claire's terrified expression, his jaw clenched tight enough to hurt. "This is all my fault," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "If I hadn't organized that protest. If I just stayed quiet like they wanted." "Stop." Daniel knelt in front of her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "Listen to me. The only people responsible for this are the ones who took her. Not you. Never you. But I'm the one who convinced her to cover the protest. I'm the one who—" "You're the one who stood up for what's right," Daniel interrupted firmly. "That's not a crime, Emily. That's courage. And I promise you, we're going to get Claire back." Emily looked at him through tear-filled eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've dealt with people like this before." He squeezed her hands gently. "And they've never won." In his office, Daniel dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Agent Sarah Roberts had been his FBI liaison during his SWAT days, and they'd stayed loosely in touch. "Hayes." Her voice was guarded. "This is unexpected. I need information, Sarah. The cartel that's moved into Pine Ridge. What do you know about them?" A long pause. "You need to stay out of this, Daniel. They've kidnapped a woman. They're threatening my daughter." "Jesus." She sighed heavily. "Look, this isn't like the groups you dealt with before. These people, they're different. More ruthless. The last 3 agents we sent undercover were sent back in pieces." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Sarah, please. Anything you can give me. They're calling themselves Los Fantasmas now. They've taken over 6 small towns along the I-40 corridor in the last year. Local law enforcement either disappears or starts looking the other way. We can't prove anything because no one will testify." Another pause. "Daniel, I'm serious. Don't engage. You've got no idea what they're capable of. They threatened my daughter, Sarah. Then get her out of town. Because if you fight them, they won't stop at threats. And I can't help you. Not officially." After hanging up, Daniel stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he opened his bottom drawer and pulled out his old SWAT tactical manual. Across town, Rafael was conducting his own form of community outreach. The hardware store owner found his supplier orders mysteriously canceled. The high school principal's car was vandalized. Small business owners received visits from men in expensive suits who talked about fire insurance and tragic accidents. The message spread: support the sheriff, bad things happen. At the local diner, conversations fell silent when police cars drove past. People crossed the street to avoid Deputy Sam. Anonymous tips about criminal activity dried up completely. Daniel felt the change like a physical weight. Decades of built trust crumbling in days. "They won't even look at me anymore," Sam reported, frustration evident in his voice. "Mrs. Henderson, who used to bring us cookies every Friday. She saw me coming and literally ran inside her house." "They're scared," Daniel said quietly. "They're scared because we can't protect them. We should be doing something." "We are." Daniel looked at the tactical maps spread across his desk. Just not what they can see. In a basement room somewhere outside town, Claire Matthews sat bound to a chair, trying to maintain her composure as Hector set up another video camera. "Please," she said. "My family must be worried sick." Hector smiled, showing too many teeth. "That's the point, isn't it? Worry makes people do stupid things. Desperate things." He adjusted the camera angle. "Your friend Emily, for example. So desperate to save you. She might agree to anything. She won't give in to you." "No." Hector pulled out his phone, showing her photos. Emily at the grocery store, at the community center, at church. Everyone gives in eventually. It's just a question of finding the right pressure point. He pressed record. "Now smile for your friend. Show her what her stubbornness is costing you." The video arrived on Emily's phone an hour later. Claire looked worse, bruised, exhausted, but still defiant. The demands were simple. Emily had to publicly announce she was leaving town, abandon her youth programs, and admit that her reckless actions had brought danger to Pine Ridge. "You have 24 hours, the distorted voice said. "After that, we start sending Claire back in pieces." Emily sat in her room, staring at nothing, the phone clutched in her hand. On her laptop, dozens of tabs showed self-defense videos, police tactics articles, anything that might help her feel less helpless. A baseball bat leaned against her desk, her first attempt at feeling safer. She'd spent hours in the backyard, practicing swings, trying to imagine herself fighting back. But watching Claire's video had shattered that illusion of control. In the garage, Daniel worked by lamplight, laying out equipment he'd hoped never to use again. Tactical vest, night vision goggles, combat boots. Each piece held memories, some good, some haunting. He checked his weapon methodically, muscle memory taking over. In the dim light, his reflection in the garage window looked different. Harder. The small-town sheriff was fading, replaced by something older and more dangerous. His phone buzzed, a text from Jack. On my way. Bringing the team. Like old times, Daniel allowed himself a grim smile. Jack Martinez had been his second-in-command in SWAT, and where Jack went, the others would follow. They'd been more than a team. They'd been family. And family looked after its own. In her room, Emily jumped at a noise outside her window. Just a branch in the wind, but her nerves were shot. The baseball bat felt inadequate now, almost childish. She opened another browser tab. Advanced self-defense techniques. The instructor on screen demonstrated a wrist lock, explaining pressure points and leverage. Emily mimicked the movements, repeating them until her arms ached. It wasn't enough. None of it was enough. But she kept practicing anyway, because the alternative was giving into helplessness. And Hayes women didn't do helpless. Dawn found Daniel in his office, surrounded by maps and surveillance photos. Jack's message had sparked something in his tactical mind. Patterns emerging, possibilities forming. The cartel had chosen Pine Ridge for its strategic location, its vulnerable businesses, its trusting nature. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd threatened his daughter. His phone buzzed again. Jack, 8 hours out. Full tactical loadout. Like you always said, go big or go home. Daniel remembered saying that lifetime ago. Back when they were young and bulletproof, taking down drug lords with flash and fury. They were older now, slower maybe, but also smarter. And a lot more dangerous. Because young men fought for glory. Old men fought for family. A knock at his office door, Sam, looking worried. Chief, you need to see this. Downtown was covered in graffiti. The cartel scorpion symbol marked dozens of buildings, along with a simple message. Submit or suffer. The townspeople hurried past with downcast eyes, pretending not to see. A few shot accusing looks at the police cars parked nearby. They think we've abandoned them, Sam said quietly. No. Daniel watched a mother hustle her children across the street. They think we can't protect them. And right now, they're right. So what do we do? Daniel checked his phone. Another message from Jack. Team assembled. Ready to roll? We changed the rules, Daniel said. Stop playing defense. In his motel room, Rafael watched Pine Ridge crumble through his network of informants. Fear was a wonderful tool when properly applied. Like a cancer, it spread cell by cell until the whole body was infected. The sheriff's daughter, Hector reported. She's been researching self-defense. Rafael laughed softly. How adorable. Send her another video. Show her what real violence looks like. But something nagged at him. The sheriff's reaction wasn't following the usual pattern. Most law enforcement officials either broke quickly or made desperate, foolish moves. Daniel Hayes was doing neither. He was waiting, planning. Like a soldier, not a cop. Find out more about his background, Rafael ordered. Everything. There's something we're missing. In the basement, Claire listened to Hector's footsteps approaching with growing dread. But she'd been a reporter long enough to recognize patterns. His sadistic games were just that, games, meant to break Emily's spirit. Well, Claire hadn't spent years investigating corruption to break now. As Hector set up the camera again, she began planning her own form of resistance. Emily's phone chimed with another video. This one showed Claire being struck repeatedly, each blow punctuated by demands for Emily's compliance. But something caught Emily's attention. Claire's hands, twisted behind her chair, forming letters in American Sign Language. They'd taken a class together last summer, a story idea about deaf community access to emergency services. Coming forme. Emily replayed the video, hope flickering for the first time in days. Claire was telling her someone was coming. But who? In the garage, Daniel finished organizing his tactical gear. Each piece checked, cleaned, ready. Like riding a bike, the muscle memory never really left. His phone lit up. Jack, 2 hours out. Brothers are ready. Say the word. Daniel typed back, Pine Ridge. North entrance. Watch for tails. He looked at his reflection again, seeing the SWAT commander he'd once been emerging from behind the sheriff's badge. The cartel thought they were dealing with a small-town cop. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Emily appeared in the garage doorway, baseball bat in hand. Dad, can you show me how to really use this? Daniel studied his daughter's face, tear-stained but determined. She'd been trying so hard to be strong, to fight back any way she could. Come here, he said softly. Let me show you something better. He opened a long case, revealing tactical batons and basic protective gear. If you're going to learn right. You're not going to tell me to hide? To stay safe? Would you listen if I did? A ghost of her old smile appeared. Probably not. You're my daughter, Daniel said, helping her adjust the protective gear. Hayes women don't hide, but they do train, they do prepare, and they do it right. As he showed her basic defensive stances, his phone lit up one final time. Jack, in position. Brothers are ready. Waiting on your order. Daniel watched Emily practice, her movements becoming more confident with each repetition. The cartel had thought to use her as leverage against him. Instead, they'd awakened something in both of them, a determination that went beyond anger or fear. They'd chosen the wrong family to threaten, the wrong town to terrorize, and soon, they'd learned just how wrong they'd been. Rafael's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his surveillance team. Multiple vehicles entering town. Military precision. Professional operators. He frowned, something tickling his memory. Hadn't there been rumors about the sheriff's background? Something about special operations? Find out everything about Hayes, he snapped at Hector. No. But deep down, he already knew. They'd miscalculated. Badly. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was here. And for the first time since entering Pine Ridge, Rafael felt something he hadn't expected. Fear. In his garage, Daniel watched Emily practice, her movements growing stronger, more confident. His phone stayed silent now, no more updates needed. Jack and the team were in position. The pieces were in place. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. But tonight was for preparation, for hardening resolve, for remembering who they were beneath the fear and doubt. The cartel had wanted to break Pine Ridge's spirit. Instead, they'd forged it into steel. And steel, as they were about to learn, cut deep when properly applied. Jack Martinez pulled his weathered pickup into the station's back lot at midnight, cutting the engine. Daniel was already waiting, standing in shadows thick with memories. They studied each other for a long moment. Time had added gray to Jack's beard, lines around his eyes, but he still moved with the fluid grace of an operator. Their handshake turned into a fierce embrace. Been too long, brother, Jack said softly. Wish it was under better circumstances. Inside Daniel's office, they sat amid tactical maps and surveillance photos. Jack picked up a picture of Rafael, studying it. You know what this reminds me of? Jack's voice was quiet. Juarez. 2016. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't need the reminder, but the memories came anyway. 8 years ago, on the Mexican border. Alpha team in position. Daniel's voice was steady in the radio, despite the tension coiling in his gut. Charlie team, status? Charlie team ready. Mike Chin's response crackled through. No movement from the target building. They'd spent weeks planning this raid. A cartel safe house hiding a major trafficking operation. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance. Clean in, clean out. The intelligence was wrong. The explosion took out Charlie team's position before they could react. As Daniel's team breached the front, automatic fire tore through their formation. Mike and Tony went down in the first volley. Pull back. Daniel screamed into the radio. It's a trap, but the cartel had planned for that too. Secondary explosions cut off their retreat. In the chaos, he saw Jack dragging a wounded teammate to cover. By the time backup arrived, for good men were dead. The cartel leaders had escaped through underground tunnels, leaving only shell casings and bloody scorpion symbols painted on the walls. Not your fault, Jack said, reading Daniel's expression. Intel was bad. Could have happened to anyone. I was the tactical commander. The responsibility was mine. And that's why you left? Became a small-town sheriff? Daniel gestured at the photos covering his desk. Thought I could leave it all behind. Give Emily a normal life. Some father I turned out to be brought the danger right to her doorstep. Neither man spoke for a moment, letting the weight of the past settle between them. Unknown to both, Emily stood frozen in the hallway listening. She'd come to ask her father about dinner, but his words stopped her cold. The tunnel system, Daniel was saying, that was their escape route in Juarez. Rafael will have something similar set up here, probably using the old mining networks outside town. You think he's following the same playbook? He's following my playbook, the one I used to take down his predecessors. Setting up in a small town, using fear to control the population, targeting families of law enforcement. Daniel's laugh held no humor. He's practically plagiarizing my tactical analysis. Emily stepped into the doorway, making both men look up. Is that why Mom died? Because of your SWAT work? The silence stretched painfully. Jack quietly stood, touching Daniel's shoulder as he left them alone. Emily. Daniel's voice was rough. Your mother's car accident had nothing to do with my work. But, yes, there were threats back then. It's partly why I left the unit, took this job, thought I could keep you safe. By hiding who you really are. There was hurt in her voice, but also understanding beginning to dawn. All those times you taught me to stand up to bullies, to fight for what's right. That wasn't just dad advice, was it? That was SWAT Commander Hayes talking. Daniel moved to her, pulling her into a tight hug. Everything I did, every choice I made, was to protect you. But maybe I protected you too much. Should have taught you more about the real world, about the kind of evil that's out there. Then teach me now. Emily pulled back, meeting his eyes. No more secrets. Before Daniel could respond, Deputy Sam burst in, looking worried. Chief? Got the mayor and the state police commissioner on the line. They're not happy. Daniel sighed. Let me guess. They want us to back off, let the FBI handle it. They're threatening to remove you from command if you don't stand down. Said something about cowboy tactics and unnecessary escalation. They're scared, Jack said from the doorway. Rafael's probably got dirt on half of them already. Standard cartel tactic. Compromise the leadership first. Daniel squared his shoulders, decision made. Sam, tell them I'll stand down. Let them think they've won. But, meanwhile, we proceed as planned. Off the books. Damn. Jack's voice was serious. You do this, there's no going back. You'll lose the badge. The badge doesn't matter. Emily does. Daniel met his old friend's eyes. You said it yourself in Juarez. Sometimes you have to become the monster to fight the monster. I also said you were too good a man to be a monster. Jack stepped closer. But you're right about one thing. You've already lost too much. Don't let them take your daughter too. Emily watched the exchange, seeing her father in a new light. Not just the compassionate small-town sheriff, but the tactical commander who'd led men into battle. Who'd lost men. Who carried those ghosts with him every day. She slipped away, heading to the garage where she knew he kept his old equipment. The tactical gear was meticulously organized, just like his desk, his tools, everything in his life. Control through preparation. When Daniel found her there, she was holding his old tactical vest. Teach me, she said simply. Really teach me. Not just self-defense, but everything. How to think like they do, how to survive what's coming. Daniel studied her face. So much like her mother's, but with a steel underneath that was all her own. It won't be easy, he warned. Neither is being afraid all the time. He nodded slowly, reaching for the vest. First lesson, gear is your last line of defense. Your mind is your first. They spent the next hour going over basic tactical principles. Daniel watching his daughter absorb everything with the same intensity he'd once seen in SWAT candidates. She asked smart questions, made connections he hadn't expected. Rafael's using fear as a weapon, she said suddenly. Like you used to use tear gas or flashbangs. It's about controlling the battlefield. Exactly. And like any weapon, it can be turned against him. Daniel smiled grimly. Now you're thinking like a tactical commander. Their session was interrupted by Daniel's phone ringing. Unknown number. He put it on speaker. Sheriff Hayes. Rafael's voice was smooth as oil. I hope you're enjoying your family time. It would be a shame if something happened to, say, the Henderson family, or the Petersons, or any of the dozen other families in your town who are completely unprotected right now. If you hurt anyone else, that depends entirely on you, Sheriff. Stand down. Publicly resign. Leave town with your daughter. Or I start sending you pieces of your townspeople along with pieces of Miss Matthews. The line went dead. Emily's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. He's scared. He wouldn't make threats if he wasn't scared. Good observation. Daniel was already typing on his phone. What else? He's trying to isolate you. Turn the town against you. Like in your SWAT days, when they cut off units from support. Which means he's vulnerable. Somewhere in his organization, there's a weak point. Something he's protecting by keeping everyone scared and divided. Daniel smiled proudly. Now you're really thinking like a tactical commander. Jack appeared in the doorway. Teams are in position. Surveillance is up. We've got eyes on all major cartel movements. And the mining tunnels? Mapped and monitored. You were right. They're using them for transport. But we found something else. Something that explains why they chose Pine Ridge. Daniel's tactical mind was already racing ahead. The old railroad junction. The one they shut down in the 90s. Perfect distribution hub, Jack confirmed. Hidden in plain sight. But it's also their weakness. Because they have to protect it, Emily said suddenly. Both men looked at her. What? I pay attention in my local history class. That junction connects to 3 major cities. If they lose it, they lose everything, Daniel finished. Good work, both of you. Now we just need to... His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous number. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough, Sheriff. Rafael's voice purred. Let me demonstrate how serious I am. Turn on your local news. The TV showed breaking news. A fire at the Henderson trucking company. Then another at the high school. Then the community center. Still want to play tactical games, Commander Hayes? Rafael's voice dripped contempt. Yes, I know who you are now. The famous SWAT commander who couldn't protect his own men in Juarez. Are you ready to lose more people under your command? Daniel's hand tightened on the phone, but his voice remained steady. You done? Excuse me? Are you done with your little performance? Because if you knew anything about Juarez, you'd know what happened to the cartel members we did catch. How they broke under questioning. How they revealed every safe house, every tunnel, every operation they knew about. A moment of silence. Then, you're bluffing. Am I? Check your mining tunnel surveillance. Right now. They heard Rafael barking orders in Spanish, then a stream of urgent reports. You see, Daniel continued conversationally. While you were busy playing with fire, my team was meeting your team. They send their regards, by the way. Those who can still talk. You're lying. My men. Your men are amateurs compared to SWAT operators who've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Want to know what else we found in those tunnels? Besides the drugs? Besides the weapons? We found your records, Rafael. Names. Dates. Account numbers. Everything. Another silence, longer this time. Now. Daniel's voice hardened. Let's talk about who's really in control of Pine Ridge. The line went dead. Emily stared at her father. Did we really? No. Daniel was already moving, checking weapons. But he'll need at least an hour to verify that. And another hour to realize I'm lying. That gives us a 2-hour window. For what? Jack grinned, checking his own gear. To make the lie true. Daniel turned to Emily. Ready for your first real, tactical operation? She straightened, chin lifting. Born ready. That's my girl. He handed her a tactical vest. Welcome to SWAT, Officer Hayes. The garage became a flurry of activity as more of Daniel's old team arrived, gearing up with the smooth efficiency of long practice. Emily watched them work, seeing her father in his true element for the first time. This was who he'd always been, not just a protector, but a warrior. And now, finally, she understood why. Some battles couldn't be won with badges and laws. Some enemies only understood one language. And Daniel Hayes was about to remind them just how fluent he was in it. The war for Pine Ridge was about to enter its final phase. And this time, everyone was ready. Even the monsters were about to learn that some small towns bite back hard. The tactical map spread across Daniel's kitchen table showed every road, trail, and potential choke point within 20 miles of Pine Ridge. Jack traced a route with his finger, tapping a specific intersection. Here, he said, County Road 23 meets the old logging track. Cartel's been using it as their primary transport route. Perfect spot for an ambush. Daniel studied the location. Remote enough to avoid civilians. multiple escape routes for their vehicles, which means they'll feel safe. Jack finished. Drop their guard. What about response time from their backup? Jack laid another map over the first, this one showing cellular coverage. Dead zone. They'll have to drive at least 3 miles before they can call for help. And the shipment schedule? According to our surveillance, they move product every 3 days. Next one's due tomorrow night. Jack pulled out his phone, showing Daniel footage of trucks moving through the area. Always the same pattern: advanced scout, main transport, rear security. Professional, but predictable. Neither man noticed Emily slipping into the darkened living room, staying just close enough to hear. We'll need to take all 3 vehicles simultaneously, Daniel mused. Can't risk anyone getting away to warn Rafael. Already planned for that. Jack spread out photos of their tactical team. Miguel and Tony take the lead vehicle here. He pointed to a sharp bend. Sarah and Chris hit the transport here. You and I handle rear security. What about extraction? They'll have the whole cartel looking for us once they realize what happened. That's where the terrain works in our favor. Jack overlaid a topographical map. These ridges provide cover all the way back to the safe house. By the time they organize a search, we'll be ghost. Emily leaned closer, memorizing details. The cartel had threatened her, her father, her whole town. Time to show them that Hayes women weren't just victims. At the Pine Ridge Inn, Rafael was giving Hector his final instructions. This shipment is crucial, Rafael emphasized. Worth more than your life? Understand? Hector nodded, checking his weapons. Full security protocol. Nothing gets close. The sheriff's been quiet lately. Too quiet. You think he's planning something? Rafael stared out the window at Pine Ridge's quiet streets. I think he's more dangerous than we assumed. Post additional men along the route. Anyone sees anything suspicious, anything at all, they die. Hector finished simply. Precisely. Neither man knew they were being watched. From her carefully chosen observation post in an abandoned office building, Emily photographed their meeting through a telephoto lens. She'd spent days mapping cartel movements, noting patterns, gathering intel, just like her father had taught her. In the pre-dawn darkness, Daniel and Jack's team moved into position. Military-grade night vision showed the terrain in ghostly green clarity. Jack had brought enough equipment to outfit a small army: cutting-edge communications, surveillance drones, even thermal imaging. Command, this is Alpha, Jack's voice whispered in their earpieces. Roadblock 1 in position. Bravo team set, came another voice. Charges planted. Daniel checked his weapon one final time. Charlie team ready. All units maintain radio silence until my mark. They'd chosen their ambush points carefully. The lead vehicle would hit an improvised spike strip, forcing it to stop at a precise location. The transport would have no choice but to halt behind it, trapped by concrete barriers they'd positioned earlier. Rear security would try to reverse, only to find their escape cut off by concealed Jersey barriers. 3 vehicles, 3 teams, 1 shot to get it right. At midnight, their patience was rewarded. Headlights appeared in the distance, the advanced scout, right on schedule. Contact, Daniel breathed into his radio. Hold positions. The lead SUV hit the spike strip at 40 miles per hour. Its tires shredded instantly, sending it sliding to a stop exactly where they'd planned. The transport truck behind it slammed on its brakes, skidding sideways. Now, Daniel commanded. Everything happened at once. Flashbangs exploded around the vehicles, disorienting their occupants. Sniper fire took out their tires. Before the cartel members could react, tactical teams converged from multiple directions. Federal agents, Jack shouted, though they weren't federal anything. On the ground, some tried to fight. It didn't last long. Daniel's team had been doing this since these cartel soldiers were in grade school. Within minutes, it was over. Clear, came the reports, 1 vehicle at a time. Daniel approached the transport truck's cargo area. Inside, exactly as expected, were dozens of carefully packed crates. Sending photos to Rafael now, Jack reported, documenting everything. Along with our demands. Alpha team, secure the prisoners, Daniel ordered. Bravo, get this cargo loaded for transport. Charlie team, establish a perimeter. Nobody gets close. The operation had gone perfectly. Almost too perfectly. Back home, Emily was waiting when Daniel returned. That was incredibly dangerous, she said without preamble. It was necessary. What if something had gone wrong? What if? Emily. Daniel took her shoulders gently. Sometimes the only way to end a fight is to show your enemy that the cost of continuing is too high. By risking your life? By showing them we're not afraid. He hugged her tight. This was just a first step. Rafael will understand the message. We can hurt him, cost him money, expose his operation. Now he has to decide if Pine Ridge is worth the price. In his hotel room, Rafael received the photos and message with cold fury. His hands shook as he read. Next time we don't just take the drugs. Next time we take everything. Sir, one of his men ventured. What are your orders? Rafael's voice was ice. Kill them. Kill them all. The sheriff, his daughter, his whole team. Burn their houses. Salt the earth. Make an example that no one will ever forget. But sir, if we escalate like that, they're already dead. They just don't know it yet. Rafael picked up his phone. Give me everyone. Every soldier. Every enforcer. Every killer on our payroll. I want Pine Ridge to disappear from the map. Emily, meanwhile, was putting her own plans into motion. She'd spent days identifying safe houses, mapping evacuation routes, establishing communication networks among trusted townspeople. In the community center's basement, she met with a small group of volunteers. If things go bad, she explained, showing them the route she'd mapped, we get the vulnerable out first. Children, elderly, anyone who can't fight. To where? Asked Mrs. Henderson, who'd once brought cookies to the sheriff's station. I've arranged safe houses in 3 neighboring counties. Different routes for different groups. Small convoys. Staying off main roads. You've thought of everything, someone commented. Emily thought of her father's tactical planning. I learned from the best. Back at the ambush site, Daniel and Jack supervised the cleanup. Every trace of their operation had to vanish before dawn. Just like old times, Jack commented, helping load the last of the seized drugs into their trucks. Better, Daniel replied. This time we're defending our home. Rafael won't take this lying down. I'm counting on it. Daniel checked his watch. By now, he's calling in every resource he has, preparing for all-out war. That's good. That's predictable. Daniel smiled grimly. And predictable enemies make mistakes. Dawn found Emily rechecking her evacuation plans. Lists of names, safe houses, contact protocols. She'd thought of everything she could, prepared for every scenario she could imagine. But as she watched the sun rise over Pine Ridge, she wondered if any amount of preparation could be enough for what was coming. Her father was right. Showing strength was necessary. But strength drew attention. Attention brought escalation. And escalation. She thought of Claire, still held captive. Of the cartel's growing brutality. Of Rafael's cold eyes. This wasn't just about drugs anymore. This wasn't even about control. This was about pride, about power, about making examples. Pine Ridge was about to become a battlefield. And battlefields had casualties. Emily straightened her shoulders, remembering her father's words. Hayes women don't hide. No, they didn't hide. They planned. They prepared. They fought. And sometimes, they laid traps of their own. In his hotel room, Rafael made call after call, mobilizing an army. But something nagged at him. The ambush had been too perfect, too precise. Sir? Hector interrupted his thoughts. Everyone's been notified. They're on their way. Rafael nodded absently, still troubled. Why take the drugs, but leave the drivers alive? Why show their hands so openly? Unless... The sheriff, he said slowly. He's not just fighting us. He's baiting us. Sir? He wants us angry. Wants us to commit everything we have. Rafael's eyes narrowed. Because an enemy focused on revenge makes mistakes, Hector finished. Precisely. Rafael stared out at Pine Ridge's quiet streets. But so does an enemy focused on protecting what they love. He picked up his phone one final time. Change of plans. Before we kill them all, let's remind them exactly what they have to lose. The war for Pine Ridge was about to enter its final, bloody phase. And no one, not Daniel, not Rafael, not even Emily, could predict exactly how it would end. But in it would, one way or another. The trap had been set. Now it was just a question of who was really trapping whom, and how many would die before they found out. The night was unnaturally quiet when Daniel's security system pinged. Silent figures moved through his yard, their thermal signatures bright against the darkness on his tablet's display. 8 hostiles, he whispered into his radio, moving in a standard sweep pattern. Copy that, Jack's voice crackled back. All preparations are set. They'd spent days fortifying the house, reinforcing doors, setting up surveillance, preparing escape routes. Emily had even helped plant the motion sensors, remembering her father's lessons about defensive perimeters. Now she crouched in her designated position upstairs, heart pounding, but hands steady on the modified paintball gun loaded with pepper spray pellets. Non-lethal, but effective. The first attacker triggered a flashbang hidden in the flower bed. The explosion lit up the night, followed immediately by confused shouts in Spanish. Remember, Daniel's voice came through their earpieces. Let them commit to the assault. Wait for my signal. The cartel team recovered quickly, splitting into 2 groups. Headed for the front door, while the others circled toward the back. That's right, Daniel muttered. Just like we planned. The front door exploded inward, breaching charges professional grade. But the attackers rushed into an empty room. Their flashlight beams revealed overturned furniture, possible cover spots, and thin tripwires glinting at ankle height. Traps, one shouted in Spanish, but too late. The first wire triggered a cascade of flashbangs and smoke grenades. In the confusion, Daniel and Jack struck from concealed positions. Their training showed precise shots, coordinated movement, years of experience turning violence into a deadly dance. Upstairs, Emily heard footsteps on the back stairs. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Wait for them to commit. Let them think they have the advantage. 2 men appeared in the hallway, weapons ready. Emily stayed hidden in the bathroom doorway, controlling her breathing like she'd practiced. The first man passed her position. The second started to follow, and Emily struck. The pepper spray pellet caught him directly in the face. As he staggered, cursing, she followed up with a self-defense move she'd drilled for hours. Palm strike to the solar plexus. Knee to the groin. The man went down hard. The first attacker spun at the noise, but Emily was already moving. Another pellet, another series of strikes. Her muscles remembered the training, fear transforming into focused action. Downstairs, the battle moved room by room. Daniel and Jack had the advantage. They knew every corner, every sight line, every prepared position. But the cartel team was professional and determined. Jack, on your left, Daniel shouted, spotting movement. Jack spun, firing, but not quite fast enough. The attacker's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him against the wall. But even wounded, Jack's return fire was deadly accurate. The cartel enforcer, one of Rafael's top men, judging by his tactical gear, dropped with a neat hole between his eyes. I'm hit, Jack grunted. But still in the fight, Daniel was already moving to cover his friend when he heard Emily's voice over the radio. 2 down upstairs. They're not getting up. Pride and fear warred in his chest. His daughter was handling herself, but she was also in terrible danger. A noise behind him. Daniel dropped and rolled instinctively. Bullets tore through the space where he'd been standing. He came up firing, taking down another attacker. Then silence fell, broken only by groans from the wounded. Status report, Daniel called. Upstairs clear, Emily responded. Back door secure, Jack added, pain evident in his voice. Front room clear, Daniel finished. Sam, what's the perimeter look like? All quiet, Chief. Sam's voice came through their earpieces from his observation post down the street. No sign of reinforcements yet. Daniel moved quickly through the house, securing weapons, checking the fallen. Most were unconscious or wounded. But one, the team leader, judging by his equipment, was largely unhurt, just trapped under an overturned cabinet. Well, Daniel said, looking down at him. Looks like you, and I need to have a conversation. The man spat something in Spanish. English, Daniel said pleasantly, or I let my daughter practice her self-defense moves on you some more. I hear she's getting quite good. 20 minutes later, Emily helped Jack bandage a shoulder while Daniel interrogated their prisoner in the garage. The man's defiance had crumbled quickly once Daniel started mentioning specific details about Rafael's operation. Things only an insider would know. The main warehouse, the man gasped. It's not in the industrial district like everyone thinks. They're using the old meatpacking plant on River Road. Underground levels, storage, processing, everything. And Claire Matthews? Second level. But you'll never reach her. The security is based on Mexican cartel protocols, Daniel finished. Standard 3-layer system, rotating passwords, armed response teams. Yes, we know. The man's eyes widened. Who are you people? Daniel smiled grimly. Just a small-town sheriff protecting his home. Emily appeared in the doorway. Dad? You need to see this. Outside, flashlights were appearing all over the neighborhood. But they weren't cartel reinforcements. They were townspeople. Word of the gunfight had spread, and instead of hiding, Pine Ridge was coming out to help. Mrs. Henderson was organizing first aid stations. Bill Anderson's trucks blocked potential escape routes. Even the teenage skateboarders Emily worked with at the community center were acting as lookouts, their boards allowing them to patrol quickly and quietly. Would you look at that? Jack said softly, leaning in his doorway. Whole towns decided to fight back. Emily stood straighter, chin lifting. They just needed to see it was possible. Inside his command center at the meatpacking plant, Rafael received the news of the failed attack with cold fury. How? He demanded. How did they know we were coming? They were ready, Hector reported. Traps, ambush points, everything prepared. Even the girl fought back. The girl? Rafael's voice could have frozen fire. The soft-hearted social worker who likes helping children. She took down 2 of our men. 3, actually, Hector corrected. Broke Martinez's nose and Garcia's ribs. Rafael hurled his glass against the wall. I want them dead. All of them. I don't care what it takes. Sir, maybe we should consider pulling out. The FBI. The FBI is not my concern. Rafael's eyes were fever-bright. My reputation is my concern. No one defies me. No one. Of course. Hector knew better than to argue. I'll make the arrangements. Back at the house, Daniel and Jack pored over blueprints of the meatpacking plant while Emily coordinated with their volunteer network. 3 access points, Jack noted. All heavily guarded. 4, Daniel corrected. There's a maintenance tunnel that's not on the official plans. I checked the original construction documents. That could work. Small team, surgical strike. While the main force draws their attention to the front, Emily joined them, studying the plans. The volunteers can help. Create distractions, block escape routes. Daniel started to protest, but she cut him off. They're already involved, Dad. The whole town is. Let them fight for their home. He looked at his daughter. Confident, capable, so different from the scared girl she'd been just days ago. She'd bloomed in the crisis, revealing a strength he'd always known was there. Okay, he said finally. But we do this smart. We do this right. They worked through the night, planning every detail. It would be different from their previous operations. This wasn't just a tactical team executing a mission. This was a whole town rising up against its oppressors. Dawn found them making final preparations. Jack checked weapons while Daniel briefed the volunteer teams. Emily moved through it all with quiet confidence, coordinating, organizing, inspiring. Look at her, Jack said softly to Daniel. Born leader, just like her old man. Daniel watched Emily demonstrating a simple self-defense move to a group of teenagers. She's better than I ever was. I fought because I was good at it. She fights because she believes in something bigger. Speaking of fighting, Jack nodded toward the street, where more volunteers were arriving. Looks like we're not the only ones ready for war. The townspeople had transformed overnight. The fear was gone, replaced by determination. They moved with purpose, following Emily's coordination plans, preparing to defend their home. Rafael's surveillance teams reported the activity with growing concern. The small town they'd sought to terrorize had become an armed camp. Every street had lookouts. Every approach was watched. And at the center of it all, the sheriff's house stood like a fortress. They're planning something, Hector warned. Let them, Rafael snarled. They want to play war? I'll show them war. But his words lacked their usual conviction. For the first time since entering Pine Ridge, Rafael felt something unfamiliar stirring in his gut. It felt a lot like fear. In the sheriff's house, Daniel made final weapon checks while Emily briefed her volunteer teams via radio. Jack's shoulder was bandaged, but he insisted he was combat ready. One shot at this, Daniel reminded them. We going fast, hit hard, get Claire out? And Rafael? Jack asked. Daniel's eyes were cold. He wanted to make an example of Pine Ridge. Time to show him exactly what kind of example we can be. The sun rose over Pine Ridge, revealing a town transformed. No longer a helpless victim, but a community united in defiance. The cartel had sought to rule through fear. They were about to learn what really happened when you push good people too far. The war for Pine Ridge was about to end, one way or another. And this time, everyone was ready to fight. The old meat-packing plant loomed against the pre-dawn sky like a fortress. Daniel and Jack lay prone on a nearby rooftop, studying it through night vision binoculars. Main entrance has 6 guards, Jack whispered. Another 4 on the roof. Thermal imaging shows at least 20 more inside. Daniel shifted his focus to the building's infrastructure. Those aren't power cables running to the support columns. No. Jack's voice was grim. Decord. Whole place is rigged to blow. They're not planning to leave evidence if things go wrong. Typical cartel insurance policy. Daniel photographed the setup, noting placement patterns. But it gives us leverage. Those charges will have a central detonator. Find that. We control their exit strategy. A noise behind them. Both men spun, weapons ready. But it was just a cat, prowling the rooftop. Still, Daniel's instincts nagged at him. Something felt off. Those instincts proved right the next morning when Tommy Chun, Pine Ridge's most trusted mechanic, asked to meet privately at his garage. I need to tell you something, Tommy said, unable to meet Daniel's eyes. His hands shook as he wiped them on his oil-stained rag. I've been helping them. The cartel? Daniel kept his voice neutral. How? Information. Who comes through the garage? What they talk about? When police vehicles need maintenance. Tommy's voice cracked. They said they'd hurt my kids. Why tell me now? Because. Tommy finally looked up, tears and determination warring in his expression. Because my father didn't escape communist China, so his son could live as a coward in America. Besides, they're going to kill us all anyway, aren't they? Daniel studied the man he'd known for years. The man who'd fixed his cruiser countless times, who'd taught Emily about car maintenance, who'd been part of Pine Ridge's backbone. Not all of us, Daniel said quietly. Not if we stand together. Tommy straightened. The warehouse? I've been inside, maintaining their vehicles. I know things, guard rotations, blind spots, access codes. Tell me everything. That afternoon, 2 more vehicles rolled into Pine Ridge. Nondescript sedans carrying Mike Torres and Sarah Chun, former SWAT operators who'd served under Daniel. Just like old times, Mike grinned, hugging Daniel. Except with better gear. He patted the high-tech equipment cases they'd brought. Sarah was already studying the warehouse blueprints. Tommy's intel changes things. We can use the maintenance bay for initial entry. Still risky, Jack pointed out. They'll be expecting something after the house attack. That's why we need someone who knows the area intimately, Emily said from the doorway. Someone who can guide you through back routes they won't be watching. Daniel started to protest, but she pressed on. I've lived here my whole life, Dad. I know every alley, every drainage tunnel, every kid's shortcut. And I've spent the last week mapping cartel patrol patterns. The SWAT team shared glances. They'd all seen that determination before, in Daniel's eyes, during their most dangerous missions. She's right, Sarah said finally. Local knowledge could make the difference. Daniel knew he was outvoted. More importantly, he knew Emily was right. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Deputy Wilson requesting an urgent meeting. Something's wrong at the station, Wilson said when they met in the parking lot. Files missing, patrol schedules changed last minute, radio frequencies compromised. A mole, Daniel concluded. Wilson nodded grimly. Has to be someone with access. Someone who? A gun pressed against Daniel's back. Don't move, Chief, Deputy Roberts said quietly. Just listen. Daniel kept his hands visible, mind racing. Roberts had been with the department 3 years. Always reliable, always unremarkable. The cartel reached out months ago, Roberts continued. Before any of this started. Offered a simple deal. Information for money. My kid's college isn't going to pay for itself. And now they want me to bring you in. But, Roberts' voice wavered. But I've seen what they do to people. What they're planning for Pine Ridge. I can't. Daniel moved faster than thought. A twist, a strike, and Roberts was disarmed. Wilson helped pin him down. You're a good cop who made a bad choice, Daniel said, securing Roberts' weapons. Help us make it right. But before Roberts could respond, multiple phones buzzed simultaneously. A video message, showing Emily being dragged into a van, fighting desperately. Did you think we wouldn't notice your reconnaissance? Rafael's voice purred. Your daughter is quite the spy, Sheriff. Now she can join Miss Matthews in our hospitality. Daniel's world tunneled to a single point of cold fury. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Where? The warehouse, obviously. Rafael laughed. Come alone, surrender yourself, and they both live. Bring your SWAT team. Well, my men get bored easily. And we have so many interesting tools here. The video showed Claire and Emily tied to chairs, back to back. Claire looked beaten, but defiant. Emily's face was bruised, but her eyes were alert, scanning her surroundings. That's my girl, Daniel thought. Stay sharp. Stay focused. You have 1 hour, Rafael concluded. Don't disappoint me. The video ended. Daniel turned to his team, expecting arguments about walking into an obvious trap. Instead, he found grim determination. Standard hostage protocol? Jack asked. With modifications, Daniel replied. Sarah, Mike, get the gear ready. Wilson, coordinate with Tommy. I want to know every possible entry point. Jack, you're on Overwatch. And Roberts? Daniel looked at the fallen deputy. Your choice. Help us save 2 innocent women, or go to jail as a cartel collaborator. Roberts met his eyes. I know the guard rotations, and their radio frequencies. Inside the warehouse, Emily tested her restraints while pretending to be more affected by the blow to her head than she really was. The guards had been sloppy, assuming she was just another helpless hostage. They hadn't noticed her dropping small objects as they dragged her in, distinctive pieces of gravel, marked with her nail polish. Breadcrumbs leading to their location in the basement. Claire, she whispered. You okay? Been better, Claire managed. Sorry they got you too. Part of the plan. Getting kidnapped was part of the plan. Emily smiled slightly, working a hairpin free. Getting inside was part of the plan. They're so focused on watching the perimeter, they never considered someone might want to get in. Understanding dawned in Claire's voice. You let yourself be caught, more or less. Though I could have done without the punch to the face. Emily felt the hairpin catch in the lock. Dad's coming. And when he does, we'll be ready, Claire finished. They fell silent as Hector entered, followed by Rafael. Comfortable? Rafael asked mockingly. The hospitality could use work, Emily replied. 1 star, would not recommend. Rafael's hand cracked across her face. Brave words. Let's see how brave you are when we start sending pieces of you to your father. You're afraid of him, Emily said quietly. I can smell it on you. Rafael grabbed her hair, forcing her head back. I fear no one, especially not some small-town sheriff playing soldier. He's not playing. Emily met his eyes. And you know it. That's why you took me, your last desperate move. Because everything else has failed. Something dangerous flashed in Rafael's eyes. But before he could respond, an alarm blared. Perimeter breach, a voice shouted over the radio. Multiple points of contact. Rafael straightened. It seems your father has made his choice. He turned to Hector. Kill them both. But Emily was already moving. The hairpin had done its work. Her hands were free. As Hector raised his weapon, she kicked back hard, sending both chairs toppling. Claire, understanding instantly, rolled with emotion. Chaos erupted above them. Gunfire, explosions, shouts of confusion. Rafael ran for the stairs, barking orders into his radio. Hector recovered quickly, bringing his gun to bear. But Emily had been practicing for just this moment. She threw the hairpin with perfect accuracy, catching him in the eye. As he staggered, cursing, she launched herself forward. All those hours of training paid off. Palm strike to the throat, knee to the groin, elbow to the temple. Hector went down hard. Emily quickly freed Claire. Can you walk? Run if I have to. Good. Emily retrieved Hector's gun. Because we're not done yet. Above them, Daniel's team executed their assault with practiced precision. Sarah and Mike breached the main entrance, drawing attention. Jack's sniper fire kept the roof guards pinned down. Daniel and Roberts moved through Tommy's maintenance access, heading for the basement. They found Emily's markers. Clever girl had used distinctive patterns of gravel, knowing he'd recognize the signals from their tactical training. Daniel, Jack's voice crackled over the radio. Rafael's headed for the south exit. Want me to take the shot? Negative. He's mine. The battle for the warehouse reached its climax. Cartel members found themselves fighting shadows. The SWAT team appeared and disappeared, striking from multiple directions, creating the illusion of a much larger force. And through it all, Emily and Claire moved carefully upward, using the chaos as cover. They reached the main floor just as Daniel's team fought their way down to the basement. "Dad!" Emily's voice carried over the gunfire. Their eyes met across the warehouse floor. In that moment, Daniel saw not his little girl, but a warrior, bruised, determined, unbroken. Pride and love nearly overwhelmed him. But there was no time for reunion. "Rafael?" he asked. Emily pointed toward the offices. Running scared, Daniel nodded once. "Get Claire out. Jack will cover you." "Dad." Emily hesitated. "Make him pay. Count on it." The battle wasn't over. Rafael was still alive, still dangerous. But looking at his daughter, strong, capable, undefeated, Daniel knew they'd already won the most important victory. The cartel had tried to break Pine Ridge's spirit. Instead, they'd forged it into steel. And now it was time to show them exactly what that steel could do. The meatpacking plant's silhouette stood black against the starless sky. Daniel led his team through the shadows, each step calculated, each movement silent. Jack, Mike Torres, and Sarah Chun moved like ghosts behind him, their years of SWAT training evident in every motion. "First marker," Jack whispered, pointing to a distinctive pattern of colored gravel. Emily's signal system was clever, obvious to those who knew what to look for, invisible to those who didn't. Daniel studied the pattern. 3 red pieces, 2 white, warning of cameras ahead. His daughter had been paying attention during those tactical lessons. "Sarah," he breathed into his radio. "Security hub is in the northwest corner. You're up." Sarah disappeared into the darkness, her specialized equipment ready to neutralize the warehouse's electronic eyes. The rest of the team waited, watching the guards patrol their predictable routes. "Remember," Daniel subvocalized, "non-lethal takedowns where possible. These are mostly local muscle, not cartel hardcore." For minutes later, Sarah's voice crackled in their earpieces. Cameras looped. "You've got 20 minutes before the system auto-resets." They moved. The first guard went down to Jack's chokehold, never making a sound. The second fell to Mike's tranquilizer dart. Daniel himself handled the third, a precise strike dropping the man like a puppet with cut strings. "Perimeter clear," Mike reported. "But we got activity on the roof." Daniel checked his watch. Right on schedule, guard change. They had 4 minutes until the next patrol would expect radio contact. Inside the warehouse, Emily worked methodically despite her bound hands. She'd managed to scratch another message into the concrete floor. 6 guards. 2 exits. Basement. Claire watched anxiously as Emily used her heel to scatter more colored gravel in a specific pattern. "What's that one mean?" "Telling them about the explosives," Emily whispered. "Dad will understand." Above them, Rafael paced in his office, watching security feeds. Something felt wrong. The exterior cameras showed normal activity, but, "Sir?" Hector appeared in the doorway. The last perimeter check was 2 minutes late reporting. Rafael's eyes narrowed. He switched camera views rapidly, studying patterns. Everything looked normal. Too normal. "The cameras are looped," he realized suddenly. "They're already inside." He grabbed his radio. "All units, intruder alert." "And Hector, get the detonator ready." Hector hesitated. "Sir, the hostages. Our leverage we no longer need." Rafael's smile was cold. "Sometimes you have to burn everything to prove a point." The SWAT team had breached the loading dock when the alarm sounded. Daniel's mind raced through scenarios, plans shifting like quicksilver. "Change of plan," he ordered. "Jack, Mike, create a diversion at the main entrance. Sarah, you're with me. We go for the hostages now. They'll be expecting that," Sarah warned. "No." Daniel smiled grimly. "They'll be expecting us to fall back, regroup." Standard tactical response. Instead, we push harder. Jack grinned. Just like Bogota. Exactly like Bogota. Breach on my mark. Jack and Mike moved toward the front, their footsteps deliberately heavy now. No more stealth. Time to make noise. The explosion they set off at the main entrance was calculated. Big enough to demand attention, small enough to avoid structural damage. Cartel soldiers responded exactly as expected, rushing to defend against a frontal assault. Meanwhile, Daniel and Sarah slipped through service corridors, following Emily's carefully left signs. A scuffed arrow in the dust here. A broken zip tie, arranged to point there. In the basement holding area, Emily heard the commotion above. Time to move. Start negotiating, she whispered to Claire. Keep them focused on you. Claire understood immediately. Please, she called out to Hector, who guarded them alone now. We can work something out. I'm a reporter. I have connections. As Claire kept Hector's attention, Emily worked the piece of broken glass she'd managed to hide earlier. The sharp edge bit into her palms, but she kept cutting at her restraints. I can guarantee your story gets told, Claire continued. Your side of things. Hector stepped closer, interested despite himself. My side. Everyone loves a redemption story, Claire pressed. The cartel enforcer, who chose to save innocent lives. Emily felt the rope give way. Just a little more? Footsteps in the corridor outside made everyone freeze. Daniel and Sarah approached the holding area, weapons ready. But as they rounded the final corner, Hector appeared behind them. Drop the weapons, he ordered. Now. Daniel turned slowly. In that moment of distraction, Emily made her move. She launched herself from the chair, tackling Hector's legs. The enforcer stumbled, his gun going off harmlessly into the ceiling. Daniel's reaction was instant. He drove forward, turning the moment into a brutal close-quarters fight. Hector was good, trained, experienced, desperate. But Daniel was fighting for his daughter. The detonator fell from Hector's pocket as they grappled, skittering across the floor. Sarah dove for it, but a burst of gunfire from above drove her back. Rafael stood on the catwalk, his weapon trained on the scene below. Enough, he shouted. Everyone stops, or I blow this whole building sky high. He held up another detonator, a backup. Of course he had a backup. You'll die too, Daniel said calmly, keeping Hector pinned. Small price to pay to be remembered. Rafael's eyes were fever bright. The cartel that couldn't be beaten, choosing death over surrender. They'll tell stories about us. They'll tell stories about how you failed, Emily called out. She'd finished freeing Claire, and now stood tall despite her injuries. How one small town stood up to you and won? Shut up. Rafael's hand trembled on the detonator. You're all going to. The sniper shot took him high in the shoulder, spinning him against the railing. Jack's voice crackled through their radios. Got him. But we've got vehicles approaching fast. Looks like his backup finally arrived. Daniel secured Hector with zip ties while Sarah grabbed both detonators. Emily hugged him fiercely. About time you got here, she said, her attempt to humor undermined by happy tears. Had to wait for your signal. Daniel hugged her back, then quickly checked Claire for injuries. Can you both walk? They nodded. Good, because... Alarms blared. Running footsteps echoed from above as Rafael's reinforcements arrived. Time to go, Sarah announced. But as they turned to leave, Rafael's voice stopped them. He'd pulled himself up against the railing, blood soaking his expensive suit. You think this ends here? He gasped. The cartel will send others. Bigger operations, more men. You've just marked your town for death. Daniel looked at his daughter, standing strong despite her bruises. At Claire, battered but unbroken. At his team, ready to fight against any odds. No, he said simply. We've marked it as somewhere you don't want to mess with. The alarms kept blaring as they made their way out through prepared escape routes. But Daniel's words hung in the air, a promise and a warning. Pine Ridge had changed. The quiet small town was gone, replaced by something stronger. Something that would never be victimized again. Rafael's backup would find an empty warehouse, a failed operation, and a message written in colored gravel. We are not afraid anymore. The war for Pine Ridge was ending. But its legend was just beginning. And somewhere in Mexico, cartel leaders would receive a message. The small towns along the I-40 corridor were no longer easy targets. They were now home to people who knew how to fight back, who knew how to win. The dawn was breaking as Daniel led his people out of the warehouse. Emily walked beside him, her head high, her steps sure. They'd gone into this as father and daughter, sheriff and social worker. They were coming out as warriors, as leaders, as symbols of what happened when good people decided that enough was enough. Behind them, the warehouse stood silent, its secrets exposed, its threats neutralized. The battle was over. But more importantly, Pine Ridge was free, and it would stay that way. Victory seemed within reach as Daniel led his team through the warehouse's service corridors. Emily and Claire supported each other while Sarah and Mike covered their flanks. But Rafael had one last card to play. The first explosion caught them off guard, collapsing part of the ceiling behind them. The second blew out a wall to their right. He's cutting off our escape routes, Daniel realized. Mike, alternate exit. West stairwells blocked. North exits. Another explosion drowned out his words. Through the smoke and chaos, they heard Rafael's laughter echoing from somewhere above. He'd triggered selective charges, turning the warehouse into a deadly maze while keeping the structure mostly intact. Main entrance is our only shot, Sarah reported, checking her tablet. But Rafael's men are converging there. Jack checked his ammunition. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. Go. I'll hold him off. No. Daniel grabbed his friend's arm. We all get out or... Can't happen, brother. Jack's smile was gentle. Someone has to stay and play rear guard. Just like old times. Emily stepped forward. Uncle Jack. Hey, kiddo. Jack hugged her quickly. Take care of your old man for me. Keep him from brooding too much. Before anyone could argue further, another explosion rocked the building. Jack was already moving, taking up a defensive position. Down the east corridor, he called over his shoulder. I'll keep them busy. Daniel. He paused. It's been an honor. Daniel's throat tightened. Jack. Go. Jack opened fire as Rafael's men appeared at the end of the hall. Tell Sarah she owes me a beer. They ran. Behind them, Jack's covering fire echoed through the building, punctuated by explosions and shouts. Each shot bought them precious seconds. Each second paid for in blood and courage. Through the smoke and debris, they glimpsed Rafael limping toward a hidden exit, clutching his wounded shoulder. But pursuing him would mean death. Jack's sacrifice would be wasted. Then Daniel spotted something on a desk they passed. A leather-bound ledger, knocked loose by the explosions. He grabbed it instinctively, recognizing Cartel accounting codes on the open pages. Evidence, he muttered, tucking it into his vest. They burst out of the warehouse in a pre-dawn darkness. Behind them, the gunfire was slowing, becoming sporadic. Nobody spoke about what that meant. Sarah led them to their backup vehicles, hidden nearby. As they drove away, the warehouse's remaining charges detonated, sending a fireball into the sky. Emily watched the flames through the rear window, tears streaming silently down her face. Claire held her hand tight. Hours later, in Daniel's office, FBI agent Sarah Roberts stared at the ledger in disbelief. This is everything, she breathed. Transport routes, corrupt officials, money laundering operations, the whole network. Jack died getting us out with that, Daniel said quietly. Make it count. Oh, it will. Sarah was already making calls. With this evidence, we can take down their entire operation. Not just in Pine Ridge, but across 3 states. Outside, Pine Ridge was coming back to life. The townspeople emerged from their homes, no longer afraid. They gathered in small groups, sharing stories, offering help where needed. Bill Anderson's trucks delivered supplies to damaged buildings. Mrs. Henderson organized a community kitchen. The teenage skateboarders who'd helped with surveillance now helped clean up debris. Deputy Sam coordinated with state police, explaining everything. The truth about Rafael, about Daniel's SWAT background, about how a small town had fought back against a cartel and won. At the community center, Emily surveyed the damage from Rafael's spiteful attack. Broken windows, scorched walls, but the structure was sound, like Pine Ridge itself. We can rebuild it, Claire said, joining her. Despite her injuries, she'd insisted on coming back to work. Make it stronger. Emily nodded slowly, an idea forming. Not just rebuild. Expand. She turned to her friend. How would you feel about teaching self-defense classes? Show others what we learned. You mean how to fight back? Against anyone who tries to intimidate us? Exactly. Emily's eyes lit up with purpose. Not just physical defense, but mental preparation. How to recognize threats. How to stay strong under pressure. Like a civilian tactical training program? Like a community empowerment program? Emily smiled. Dad taught me that strength isn't just about fighting. It's about being prepared, being united, helping each other. Within weeks, the program was running at full capacity. Women, teenagers, elderly residents, everyone wanted to learn. Emily and Claire's classes became about more than just self-defense. They became about healing, about transforming fear into determination. Meanwhile, the cartel ledger sent shockwaves through law enforcement. Arrests were made, operations shut down, corrupt officials exposed. The FBI's investigation spread like wildfire, burning away years of carefully built criminal infrastructure. But Rafael had vanished. Rumors placed him in Mexico, trying to explain his failure to cartel leadership. Other rumors suggested he was gathering forces for revenge. The truth emerged on a quiet Tuesday morning. Daniel received a case file from FBI contacts. Photos of Rafael's body, found in a ditch outside Mexico City. He'd been executed, cartel style. Seems his bosses didn't appreciate the attention he brought them, Agent Roberts explained over the phone. Or the loss of their distribution network. They decided to downsize. Daniel shared the news with Emily that evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset. She'd been teaching advanced classes all day, her students showing remarkable progress. So it's really over? She asked. This chapter is. Daniel gestured at his tactical gear, packed away in boxes. Time to put that life behind me. For good this time. But not the lessons, Emily said softly. Never the lessons. No. He smiled at his daughter. Stronger now, more confident, but still compassionate. Still determined to help others. Those we keep. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their town wind down for the night. Children played in yards without parents anxiously watching. Neighbors chatted on sidewalks without fear. Police cruisers patrolled with windows down, officers exchanging waves with residents. This was what victory looked like. Not just the absence of fear, but the presence of strength. Community strength. In his office the next morning, Daniel found a package from Jack's sister. Inside was Jack's old SWAT badge and a note. He wants you to have this. Keep teaching. Keep protecting. Keep fighting the good fight. Daniel placed the badge beside his sheriff's star. Two symbols of service, of sacrifice, of the price sometimes paid for doing what's right. At the community center, Emily's advanced class was graduating. As she watched her students demonstrate their skills, not just in self-defense but in awareness and confidence in supporting each other, she felt profound pride. These people would never be victims. They'd never stand by while others were victimized. They'd learned what Pine Ridge had learned, that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in fighting battles, but in choosing to stand together against darkness. Claire, recovered from her injuries, was already planning a series of articles. Not just about the cartel, but about community resilience, about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength. Think other towns will learn from our example? She asked Emily. They already are. Emily showed her messages from neighboring communities, asking about starting similar programs. Word spreading. Small towns aren't easy targets anymore. The sun rose over Pine Ridge, painting the sky in colors of hope. Daniel watched it from his porch, coffee in hand, at peace with his decisions. The SWAT commander was gone, but the protector remained. The warrior had become a teacher. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Emily joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. Thought you could use a refill. They stood together, father and daughter, watching their town wake up. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. Children's laughter floated on the morning air. Life went on, stronger for having been tested, more precious for having been defended. You know what Mom would say about all this? Emily asked suddenly. Daniel smiled, remembering Sarah's fierce spirit. She'd say we did good. Yeah. Emily leaned against her father's shoulder. We did. The battle for Pine Ridge was over. But its legacy was just beginning. In small towns across America, people were learning what one community had proved. That evil thrives only when good people do nothing. That strength comes not from weapons, but from unity. That sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who simply refuse to back down. And that even the smallest towns can have the biggest hearts and the strongest spirits. As Daniel and Emily shared that peaceful moment, watching their town embrace its new day, they knew they'd not just survived. They'd shown others how to thrive. And that was worth every sacrifice, every scar, every difficult choice along the way. The sun climbed higher, promising another beautiful day in Pine Ridge. Another day of freedom, of strength, of community. Another day of proving that sometimes the best stories aren't about how the battle is won, but about what's built in its aftermath. Peace, unity, hope, and the unshakable knowledge that, together, they could face anything. The end. So what would you do to protect your town? How far would you go to keep your family safe? Drop a comment below, and let us know what you thought of Pine Ridge's stand against evil. If this story of a father's love and a town's courage touched your heart, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Tomorrow we'll bring you another incredible tale that will touch your hearts. Until then, stay strong, stay united, and remember, sometimes the biggest heroes come from the smallest towns.